Just a few points worth noting about the announcement that the UAE is leaving OPEC. The first thing to note is this is a political move more than it is an economic move. The UAE, since the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman took power in Saudi Arabia, has been adamant about moving out of the shadow of Saudi Arabia, detaching itself from that big brother. It tried to get out of OPEC in 2023. The Saudis tried to make concessions to keep the UAE as part of the bloc, given that it is a major oil producer as part of OPEC. But this time the UAE believes that now it's armed with Israel, now it's armed with its lobbying machine in Washington, it has the power and capabilities to say to Saudi Arabia, I don't need to be under your umbrella anymore. I don't need to be part of the Saudi-led OPEC. And this point is significant. There's a reason why the UAE President Mohammed bin Zayed supported Mohammed bin Salman's bid to be crown prince in the first place. The reason bin Zayed supported Saudi bin Salman is because bin Zayed saw in bin Salman somebody who would ruin Saudi Arabia from the inside. Bin Zayed had long loathed the relationship with Saudi Arabia, that Saudi Arabia would lead on the issues of the region and UAE would have to follow Saudi Arabia. By supporting bin Salman, bin Zayed saw in bin Salman somebody who would ruin the traditional structures within Saudi Arabia that allowed it to exert the soft power necessary to allow Saudi Arabia to take the lead. Bin Zayed saw in bin Salman somebody who would go to war with the Muslim identity, that would evoke the sympathies of the Muslim world, that allowed Saudi Arabia to lead on the issues that the Muslim world found relevant. Bin Zayed saw in bin Salman, his belief was that bin Salman would be somebody who would go to war with the Islamic identity of Saudi Arabia, embark on a de-Islamization program, introduce these raves and these concerts and the like, that would insulate Saudi Arabia from the rest of the Muslim world, that would detach Saudi Arabia from the rest of the Muslim world, and that bin Salman would be somebody who, as a result, would not take a leadership position on issues related to Palestine, but instead would pursue a policy of exploration of normalization of ties by opening the Saudi airspace for the Israelis, by coming out and saying that we are getting closer to normalization every single day, thereby utterly destroying the capabilities of Saudi Arabia to summon that soft power from the Muslim world that enabled it to leverage political power as it had done in the past against the likes of Israel and the Americans for the sake of the Palestinians. Bin Zayed saw in bin Salman somebody who would pursue grand projects and take Saudi Arabia from a country that was in surplus to a country that is now in debt and still heavily reliant on oil. And now the UAE finds itself in a position whereby when the prices stabilize after the war in Iran finishes, the UAE has the ability to pump enough oil to bring the oil price so low that Saudi Arabia will be plunged into an economic crisis while UAE can still survive on that. Bin Zayed supported bin Salman on the basis that bin Salman would not be able to assert Saudi power and influence in the region as UAE pursued its own initiative, its own foreign policy. In Yemen, the UAE decided to impose on Saudi interest by sending its southern separatist proxies to take Hadramaut that the Saudis had called the red line. Saudis responded by bombing the southern separatists. The UAE, instead of acknowledging that this is Saudi Arabia's red line, the UAE is now saying to Saudi Arabia that now I am armed with Israel, now I am armed with Washington, I'm now going to lobby Washington to get Islah, your ally, the Saudi ally, to get Islah designated as a terrorist organization to prevent you, ya Mohammed bin Salman, from maneuvering in Yemen and having your way, because my way will take priority now. The age in which Saudi Arabia is the big brother is done, and this is the age in which the UAE now steps forward in order to redesign the region under the wishes of Mohammed bin Zayed. Mohammed bin Zayed invited the president of Somaliland, who is reportedly considering allowing the Israelis to establish a base on that Red Sea. They say that it is targeted against the Houthis, which is partly true, but it's also targeted against the Saudis. And the Saudis understood this by writing a statement in which they protested the visit of the president of Somaliland to Abu Dhabi. The reality is that the UAE leaving OPEC is not primarily about economics. It's the UAE saying to Saudi Arabia, I am not going to follow you anymore. I will not follow Mohammed bin Salman. And that even as bin Salman goes after the UAE to try to contain their onslaught, the reality is that bin Zayed believes bin Salman cannot summon a regional effort against him. That the Turks do not believe that bin Salman can beat bin Zayed. That's why Erdogan sent Hakan Fidan to the UAE to affirm to the UAE that ties will remain the same regardless of their conflict with Saudi Arabia. It's why the Qataris were hesitant to support bin Salman against bin Zayed, and Emir Tamim went to visit the UAE while the Saudis and UAE were clashing with one another. Bin Zayed's support for bin Salman was on the basis that bin Salman would be so disastrous for Saudi Arabia's soft power, so disastrous on the traditional structures that enabled Saudi to assert itself. And bin Zayed believes that gamble is paying off. He believes he's now powerful enough to challenge Saudi Arabia to withdraw from OPEC on the day that Saudi Arabia called on the regional leaders to meet in Jeddah to come up with a unified front against Iran. Bin Salman had summoned the regional leaders to Jeddah to say to them, let's come together and find a unified position. How do we address the Iranians who are firing missiles at us in response to the Israeli aggression? That's the day when bin Salman was trying to assert a leadership role in the region. That's the day that bin Zayed chose to withdraw from OPEC. Bin Salman may believe that Iran is the greatest and more immediate threat to Saudi Arabia. That may have been the case once upon a time. Before Israel perhaps was a primary and immediate threat to Saudi Arabia. That may have been the case once upon a time. But the reality is now bin Zayed armed with Israel on his right and Washington on his left. And with UAE commentators coming out and saying we no longer need to waste words anymore. It appears that the UAE has set its sights. And it's not an ambition it was hiding before. On the ruin of Saudi Arabia. And that's not an exaggeration at all. And bin Zayed believes it would have been impossible under the time of King Abdullah. It would have been impossible under the days of King Fahd. Impossible under King Khalid. Impossible, definitely impossible under King Faisal. But it's definitely possible under Mohammed bin Salman because of his aversion to the very Muslim identity that enabled Saudi Arabia to survive for so long. And bin Zayed will say to himself that the Saudi state has already collapsed before. It collapsed once and came back, collapsed second and it came back. That it can collapse again. And it may well be that very soon we might hear stories of Saudi Arabia or plans of Saudi Arabia being carved into five, as was suggested when the Saudis were beefing the Qataris. We're recording soon the next episode of Move. So make sure you put your questions in the comments so that we know what topics you want us to focus on. See you soon.